you need different blockchains that are going to kind of properly address the needs of different types of users. And so that's kind of why I think, A, there's so many today, and that we're going to continue to see more and more pop up.
Hello, and good afternoon from Dubai. Good morning if you're in America, Western Europe. It's a pleasure for Gaurav and myself to host a dynamic duo who are crypto experts. And because crypto is such a young business, I think their combined age is mine, I'm guessing. Thank you so much for listening to this live. If you listen to this on replay, thank you for listening to this on our Apple and Spotify and other podcast channels that we are on. Sarthak, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then also Temujin, tell the audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you're here with us today.
Absolutely. So basically, I'm the co-founder of Demo and XDC. So Demo is the parent entity to XDC. XDC is an NFT marketplace. And so talking a little bit about Demo, so we started back in 2016, where we were assisting different blockchains with essentially block propagation services, where we were just helping with the entire tech aspect of things. We then later deployed into the DApp deployment phase, where we launched our very first NFT marketplace on the XDC network. And yeah, here we are. So XDC NFT is a marketplace based on XDC network. And today we'll be talking about everything NFTs and interoperability.
Wow, impressive. And I'll jump in here. My name is Temujin Louie. I'm the director of marketing at Wanchain. So Wanchain itself is a relatively old project by crypto standards, meaning, we've been around since late 2017. So really one of the oldest projects that you'll probably encounter nowadays. But, from the start, Wanchain has been focused on interoperability, basically making different blockchains who generally exist as siloed networks to be able to kind of talk and interact and kind of operate as one combined meta network. And so Wanchain today exists, primarily as a research and engineering focused project. So we're really kind of plugged into the research side of interoperability. We have a few kind of core partners, such as the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, that we work with very closely to try to kind of come up with the standards, that will allow interoperability to really become a reality.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. Before we dive into more specific businesses such as XDC and Wanchain and others, let's zoom out. Sarthak, what is a blockchain? Why do we need blockchains? And why are there so many blockchains? Like I have like a few flavors, right? And it's like French cheese. There are thousands of French cheeses. We got thousands of blockchains. What's going on?
So essentially, I'm assuming a lot of our listeners might know what a blockchain is, but just to sort of put it into a nutshell, it's essentially just the underlying technology of all our famous crypto assets we have. So be it Shiba Inu, be it Ethereum, be it Bitcoin. So blockchain is basically the underlying technology behind it, also known as the distributed ledger technology. Now, why there's so many of it is, so what I like to think of it is the entire blockchain space is a globe. And each city represents a different blockchain, let's say. So if I were to say Ethereum, let's say, is New York, Polygon would then be LA, XDC network would then be Dubai. Now, each city would have its own infrastructure, its own community, and sort of its own governance and how they work and how operate it. Yeah. So I think right now, I think there are 11,000 or 12,000 cryptos. I mean, in the near future, I do feel that a lot of them are going to get shut down. A lot of them are going to get rug pulled. But eventually, we'll be left with a couple of major cities, blockchains, if I may. And eventually, of course, the topic of the hour is interoperability. Eventually, everyone is going to be sort of interconnected with each other.
I'm going to get Temujin to come in with the same question, but if you don't mind, Sarthak, I'm just going to slightly adjust your analogy. So if Ethereum is Manhattan or New York, I'd argue Polygon's probably New Jersey or Brooklyn, but let's just leave it at that. Temujin, same question to you.
We're supposed to get good followers on this podcast, Ronit. Not people fighting us. Come on.
No, I'm basically re-quoting Sandeep, so that's all cool.
I love it.
Polygon a year ago.
Here we go.
He's got a better one. Sandeep, you're listening, let me know, but that's Temujin. And I love XDC as Dubai because most of us here are zooming in from Dubai. So, you know, I'll let Gaurav do the big love to Dubai later on as a lifelong Dubai resident.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll jump in there on the kind of the second half of that question, since Sarthak did such a good job on the first half. So, you know, as you mentioned, there's kind of like a ridiculous number of blockchains today, and you know, do we need more? Do we need this many? You know, what's up with all of that? And I guess, like, to me, this is really kind of like a clear indication that there's still some major issues to resolve. As you said, it's a very young industry. You know, blockchain, the core tech there is strong, it's proven, but you know, there's still improvements that need to be made and that are being made. We look 10 years from now, it's not going to look the same that it is now. So I think that's kind of one of the symptoms. One of the symptoms of this fact is that there's so many blockchains, because you know, everyone has different use cases, different requirements. We talk a lot about this, you know, trilemma, the decentralization, scalability, and security. And okay, let's ignore all these so-called kind of miracle solutions that go out and claim, you know, that they've solved all three. It's not an issue anymore. But in terms of kind of more legitimate projects, you know, that are kind of making these decisions on how to balance these three factors. And, you know, different users, different types of users, they themselves probably have different needs as it relates to these three factors. You know, some enterprises, government use cases, you know, they might be totally fine having a you know, totally centralized solution, and then they could just kind of max scalability and security. You know, some you know, regular users, you know, probably care more about the decentralization side of the equation. So you need different blockchains that are going to kind of properly address the needs of different types of users, and so that's kind of why I think there's so many today, and that we're going to continue to see more and more pop up. And I really think, you know, that's kind of going to be the case indefinitely until we get something like industry-wide standards, you know, that really are enforced, whether that be by government or whether it be more of a grassroots movement, you know, that establishes these standards. And then at that point, maybe you'll finally start seeing kind of some stability in the industry.
Now, we've touched upon all these blockchains, thousands of blockchains. Temujin, talk us through interoperability between these blockchains and how your protocol, your organization comes into this.
Sure. So if we go back to this kind of the start of, let's call it just mainstream blockchains, you know, after Bitcoin had launched and then Ethereum had launched, and that was kind of the jumping off point for having all sorts of different blockchains being able to launch. You know, especially those early days, they were either trying to replace Ethereum, the so-called ETH killers, or they were just complete copies of Ethereum. And, you know, oftentimes they were both. They were exact copies that were claiming they were going to kill Ethereum. And, you know, we started seeing that you might have little ecosystems or different tokens appear on some of these blockchains, but you really couldn't do anything between them. You were stuck on Ethereum, you were stuck on, I'll just use Polygon here, but it could be any other blockchain, and you're really isolated into this one network. So what interoperability in a project like OneChain is trying to achieve is to allow kind of the interconnection to turn these sort of intranets into really kind of more of an internet composed of many different networks or many different blockchains. And, you know, it's a incremental process. Where the industry right now is we're all pretty good at being able to move kind of value, to move tokens from one chain to the other. I can jump into a little more detail about that in a second about how it's done, but that's kind of where we are at in the industry. You know, a few years ago, we were able to kind of verify messages cross-chain. I could pretty convincingly say, you know, on network B, I can read and detect a message written on network one, you know, and I'm very, very confident in the accuracy of that message. So that was kind of the first step of building this interoperability. Then, like I said, we were able to get the value transfers, meaning I can lock my ETH on Ethereum and I can mint a mirrored version or a wrapped version of it on XDC, for example. And now I can functionally use Ethereum on another network. Now, these are kind of like cool use cases, but it's not, I don't think, what anyone would consider quote unquote true interoperability. We really will kind of want more of a seamless experience. So I think that's really the end goal. frankly, the industry is not there yet, but what it's going to kind of, or at least what OneChain thinks, and what I also believe, is that the next kind of major step of interoperability is going to be cross-chain smart contract function call. So basically being able to directly call a function in a smart contract on XDC network from Ethereum, rather than using kind of wrapped assets and things like that. Of course, to do that, you're going to need some type of universal language, some standards, something like a TCP/IP, but for the blockchain world to make that possible. And then, once that is in place, then you can really start seeing these type of true cross-chain applications. Right now, there's a lot of applications that say they're cross-chain, but really what that basically means is we can use wrapped assets. But something that is really operating seamlessly on multiple networks is kind of definitely the end goal of interoperability.
Sarthak, you guys are talking about interoperability, NFT interoperability. Mm-hmm. Are you going to do real interoperability, or you're doing this wrapping stuff as well?
No, I mean, of course, as Temujin said, so we are still far off from sort of having two smart contracts call function from different blockchains. So, I mean, we definitely are inching towards that. The industry is inching towards that. So up till then, of course, the only doorway we have is through sort of to get in through these wrapped assets sort of functionality. So that's definitely something a lot of the major players are doing as well. Now, once we do sort of start evolving above the whole wrapped assets sort of phase, and we have that ability to sort of, call those functions directly, that's when we achieve like true decentralization and true interoperability. I mean, there's a lot of R&D that goes behind it. So, I mean, in my opinion, if anyone's going to be the first ones to do it, it's definitely going to be OneChain. So even for our bridges with the marketplace and everything, we are using the underlying technology from OneChain. So that's what's helping us with the whole interoperability side of things.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to slander wrapped assets or anything like that. It's a cool technology and it creates definitely some types of use cases, but there's more. It's not the end goal. It's a step along the way.
Yeah.
So today, there are obviously cross-chain bridges, and they've been in the news a lot this year because of hacks and often sort of social engineering driven hacks. I don't know if either of you want to pick up on what's going on in that space at the moment and why they've been vulnerable to the hacks this year and the flaws, and what needs to happen in the short term to remediate or remedy this.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of it. Oh, sorry, good.
We all just want to talk about the hacks.
Go for it.
But yeah, definitely, we've all seen it. It's been awful news, especially for someone who does build bridges like OneChain, when you see all the headlines, about, cross-chain bridge is unsafe. Look at this hack, hundreds of millions of dollars stolen. Obviously, it's a bad thing. And quite frankly, bridges themselves, they have to be really well made, or else there's going to be kind of vulnerabilities that are going to pop up. Frankly, bridges are very easy to make. Almost any project could bridge a token from one chain to another if they don't care about security, if they don't care about decentralization. If the only thing they care about is I can lock it on one chain and then I'll mint another token on another chain, anyone can do that. And I think one of the reasons that we've seen this kind of uptick in bridge hacks is because more and more people have, been bold enough to do it that way. Someone with no kind of background in interoperability and just thinking, well, we could probably just do it ourselves. And so we've seen that kind of happen a lot. And then, like clockwork, it ends up getting exploited because bridges, because they exist somewhat between different blockchains, it creates a lot of several different potential vulnerabilities. And some of them are related to the bridge itself, some of them are not. So for instance, if I'm bridging, I'll just keep using Ethereum and XDC here. So if I'm bridging from Ethereum and XDC, not only when I'm designing the bridge architecture do I have to ensure that that is A, decentralized and B, secure, but then the bridge itself is also kind of impacted by security issues on both the source layer 1 blockchain, so Ethereum, and also the the target layer one, in this case, in this example, XDC. So there's just kind of a lot of different angles that the bridge has to account for. And this is why, it's really a relatively slow and incremental developing sub-industry. And this is also why when people, are bold enough to just jump right into the water and launch a bridge without proper R&D, that you do see these exploits. And then also the fact that there's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars locked into these things, they do make attractive targets to nefarious actors.
Sarthak, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I mean, I think Temujin pretty much aced it. But what I like to think of these sort of potential hacks and vulnerabilities, I like to divide the bridges into two categories. So one of them being a trust-based bridge, one of them being a trustless bridge. Now, to give you an example of this, imagine yourself in a grocery store. I mean, you're at the checkout. You either have two options. Either you go to the cashier to get your things built, or you go to a self-checkout. Now, this is where the centralization part of things come. When you go to a cashier to get your things built, we are sort of establishing a single point of failure for the trust-based bridge. But whereas when you go into the self-checkout, there is certainly some sort of decentralization, but also you are relying on the fact that the POS, the sort of server is going to be working perfectly. So, I mean, there are certain issues with the hacking side of bridges still, be it trust-based or be it trustless. For the trust-based, of course, the number one source is definitely centralization and single point of failure. For the decentralized ones, there's, of course, I mean, if you just take an example of the wormhole hack, which was 320 million from the Solana and ETH bridge. I mean, the reason for the hack later identified was a vulnerability in the smart contract. So, I mean, things like these will just keep us sort of, on our toes to not have these. I mean, it's a hard way to learn, but it is one of the ways to definitely get more secure and, just go towards the more secure side of the bridges.
And I'll add one thing to that, because you did mention the smart contract issue. Often, and I would venture to say, potentially every single bridge hack that has happened, the part of it that was exploited was not the parts of cross-chain technology that are unique to cross-chain interoperability solutions. It can be things like, Sarthak said, maybe there was a coding issue in a smart contract. These type of risks are not risks that are about cross-chain technology itself. This is a potential vulnerability in like poorly programmed smart contracts. So this is something that's not unique to cross-chain technology. Similarly, most of these big hacks, there's like a human element, that is involved, that gets either socially engineered or something like that. This also, again, is not about cross-chain technology itself. It's more so the fact that you have these, let's just call them like the sub-industry, the bridges, where it's relatively new, and therefore it's attracting a lot of inexperienced people. And so these will be kind of the target, let's say. And we'll just ignore for now, the handful of times where it was, proper malfeasance, where potentially a bridge maker is claiming that they're doing one thing, but then they get exploited, and you realize actually they weren't at all doing what they were saying. They were saying it was completely decentralized, and then some hacker found like, oh, actually all the funds are in one wallet, and I emailed this dude and tricked him to give me his private keys, and now I get all the funds.
Sorry, made me choke there. I'm going to bring Gaurav into the conversation in a second. He's going to ask about projects and all of that stuff. But before we do that, we've had a listener, someone listening live, who's actually messaged in a question. So I thought I'd put that into the conversation, and it kind of is part of this interoperability discussion we've begun having. When we listen to end use cases, when people say, hey, this is why gaming is going to be amazing in Web3, or this is why the metaverse or whatever is going to be amazing, the examples often given is you have your racing car. I mean, my friend Gaurav has loads of these, but he can drive them from Dubai to Abu Dhabi or fly it to, Rome. But in games today, you're stuck in one universe. And the promise is that in Web3, I'll be able to, Gaurav will take his whatever classic Ferrari from one universe to another. And we know it doesn't happen. Right? Same whether it's like, my fancy handbag or whatever, it just, you're stuck in one space. So how is this going to play out? Like, when are we going to get this promise of interoperability in the end use case that I will be able to take my, make-believe pixelated Ferrari from one universe to another, from this, Unity platform to some other, whatever. I mean, can you put a timeline on this?
7 years.
2030, okay.
But more seriously, of course, it's a little difficult to say exactly when it's going to happen. But I think we can be optimistic in that you can see the seeds and the first steps that are being taken right now. So I'll play a bit with that specific example you gave, with kind of related to gaming. I remember, in the previous bear market, let's say, so a few years ago, that's kind of when the early conversations had, or at least when I was getting exposed to them, early conversations about the blockchain's impact on gaming and what that could mean. And then people were kind of getting stuck with the general idea of like, oh, why? Okay, so it's kind of cool, okay. The idea of I can bring a weapon from game 1 and use it in game 2. That's a cool idea. And then the pushback was always like, oh well, A, why would any major game company do that? Or B, you don't need blockchain to do that. If I'm Ubisoft and I want to do that, I can just do it. I don't know how many of you are hardcore gamers, but like when Destiny 1 was coming out, that was kind of like, they didn't necessarily follow through on it, but that was like the pitch, like you'd find a gun and you'd see the whole history of the gun. Oh, this gun was used to kill like this specific monster, like, 2 years ago, and it had this real history, and you could show off this weapon, and it had all this kind of rich lore tied around it. And so, like I said, people were very, very skeptical. But then, maybe at the height of this most recent bull market, you started seeing some things like that, and it kind of popped up in ways that were unintuitive. So, for instance, you started seeing that instead of starting with the game, grassroots developers were starting with the weapons. They were starting to build NFT quote unquote weapons that were not part of games. And then they were making them publicly available for any kind of indie game developer to then go and take these weapons. And then via kind of the back door, we started seeing, okay, now I can actually answer that question from 3 years prior when people were saying no one would ever do that. Well, you just have to spin it a little bit, and then you can kind of see the path. Because it's very unintuitive to say, I'm going to make a game and I'm going to start with weapons, that don't belong to any game, rather than take a weapon from one game and bring it to another. So I think, this is happening, and it's cool. It's something, I wouldn't have thought about on my own. I don't even know if I would have believed that it would work, but then it started happening. So I think this is the kind of real exciting part about interoperability. And as more and more of these things pop up, you're going to see these crazy ideas.
Maybe we can take it offline, Temujin, and you can show me the games and the
I'll send you some links.
I've already blasphemed by talking about your digital cars, so come on into the conversation.
Thanks, Ronit. No, it's been super interesting. I'm loving the conversation because, sitting from day one out here in Dubai, where they set up the global blockchain forums and assemblies and groups way back, 7-8 years ago, when they first started with the Prime Minister's office, before they'd even done anything with Dubai Future Accelerator. It's super interesting to see how the conversation started with what is blockchain, almost how Ronit started this conversation. What is it? Why does it even start? And that concept, that discussion is still happening today, actually at its core, right? Why blockchain? And the conversation evolved. I remember when people talked about blockchain in the beginning, they were like, why blockchain? Then people said, oh, but the transaction volume per second is too slow. Okay, we've solved that problem. Now we're talking about security. Okay, we've solved that problem. And now we're talking about, there are so many chains. Now we're talking about interoperability. So the confidence level of this momentum of this community and the developers that are sort of getting on board with the program of building this infrastructure, essentially, which is what it is. It is a brand new core infrastructure and Rails for transactions and interaction types to ride on, right? I think interoperability itself will also be something that will be solved, and then the next discussion will come. But the reason I bring this up as a moving segment of each of these things that are happening as an organic discussion and the life cycle of blockchain is, what is it for, right? From your point of view that you're seeing adopted, and organically you've talked about gaming, right? And that's one thing. Now, gaming was never a problem to solve, but it's an opportunity to create a better ecosystem for those interactions which people have genuinely craved for, and creating unit economics in a different space. It's created a different opportunity and engagement with that community. I don't think it solved the problem, right? Leaving that aside, what are the other use cases that both of you are seeing current adoption for? Is something that I'm interested in. And I want to move just into things that perhaps the people who are on this conversation, listening to us right now, who might be into the space or might not be into the space, can actually learn from both of you to understand. Is it medical? Is it COVID testing? Is it tracking people who are trying to avoid taxes? I don't know. Is it giving identity to refugees that fall into displaced people's programs? Can you guys tell us from both of your perspectives what else you're seeing as adoption from what's happening in your spaces and you're creating for? And
yeah, I mean,
either one of you, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think with the blockchain adoption, I mean, it's spread out in a lot of different types of industries, and it has a lot of use cases, I would say. I mean, it's ranging right from, I think, it's finance, energy, data storage, privacy, security, ML, there's AI is coming up, there's payments, there's, I mean, social network, content creation, supply chain, trade finance, I mean, n number of things that are sort of shifting towards the blockchain environment. I mean, even if you look at, so there's this place in India called Jharkhand. So the entire military data source system is going to be shifted to a blockchain-based source system now. This is, of course, because it's more sort of secure, tough to hack, and all those things. So I think a lot of the world is going to be reliant on the DLT underlying solutions of the blockchain, especially because of the securitization of things.
It's interesting. And Temujin, from your point of view, what are you saying?
Yeah, I think you mentioned something very interesting about new opportunities versus solving problems. So I think definitely when we naturally just start speaking, we end up talking about new opportunities because those are sexier and a little more exciting. Mm-hmm. But in terms of kind of the current use cases that are solving problems, I think it's basically kind of all the stuff that's happening in the back systems. So it's not really particularly exciting to talk about when you talk about supply chains or things like that. But anything where there's today potentially data quality / the verification of data issues or transparency issues. So this really are things that happen in kind of all industries when you have basically different entities that need to be sharing information in some way. So you see this in supply chain, you see this in healthcare, you see this in commerce, really kind of across the board. And so this is kind of where blockchain is, at least the lowest hanging fruit, is what blockchain solves. If we talk about international remittance, it's not only because Bitcoin was the first kind of application, let's say, of blockchain. It's because the issues that are kind of present today in international remittance are also well suited for to be solved by blockchain. As you're kind of moving to money to different countries, oftentimes they might be using different messaging formats. I think some people might also be surprised, to find out that when you're doing an international transfer, depending on where you're sending it to, of course, sometimes you need manual human intervention to complete these transactions. They might also be surprised to find out that the messaging and the and actually balancing the accounts are different processes. When you think about it, it's automatic when you think about it with blockchain, that these two layers that become combined. You can send the message, and the value together. So these themselves are already kind of direct solutions to a lot of the kind of friction that is happening in huge systems, that impact all of our daily lives, but they're back systems, so it's just kind of replacing the kind of engine that society is running on.
Right. It's the infrastructure,
and that's what's going to help. Yeah, exactly.
It's the infrastructure, and that's something else that's also very interesting to understand, is because as you increase adoption, there's another unique problem that sort of crops up around you is when we first started talking about blockchain long time ago here in Dubai at the Prime Minister's office here, that group, the other thing was the number of developers. I think at that time globally, it was on record that there were something like just under 18,000 blockchain developers globally at that time. 18,000. I mean, it's literally, they went and looked at all the big four and everyone else and said, how many do we have? And they're like 18,000, or 20,000. They're like, there must be a zero missing there. And they're like, nope, that's it. So from that perspective, that creates another issue, right? I have so many different people trying to create a better cookie cutter kind of model effectively, right? My chain does this, your chain does this, my chain does that. And yes, consolidation will happen, and about a large percentage will find their way out or sustain through some micro adoption because they can. But what are you guys seeing on both your sides in terms of training, academia, adoption? Because what's also interesting is coders are getting younger and younger and younger, right? And people are experimenting more and more and more with ecosystems. How many people are out there in the ecosystem who are developers right now? Do you guys know? And what are you guys doing in your own ways as initiatives to train people to support these ecosystems as they grow?
Yeah, I sorry,
go ahead. Just keep talking. Go ahead, go for it.
Sarthak, you go for it. Go on. And then I'll switch over the next question. Go.
No, I mean, this is one issue which even we as a company face a lot, to get some really good devs on board. This is definitely one of our growing concerns. I mean, there is definitely scarcity in the market. I mean, if you want a good dev, you either pay a huge bomb for it, or they're just not busy, or the schedules are too packed and you just have to wait like 8 to 10 months for them. So, I mean, this is definitely one of the huge aspects in the space. It's starting to sort of fade off now. I mean, there are different initiatives, essentially from, I think, different blockchains, from Polygon, from XDC Network as well. So XDC Network has this block degree program where, you get to learn about all this. So, I mean, things like these will slowly sort of make its way into universities as well, offering like a 2-year or 3-year blockchain degree or something like that. And I think that's when we actually start seeing a lot more sort of fluidity in terms of devs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, definitely, I can't give you like an exact number or anything like that of how many blockchain developers are out there, but certainly it's a high demand role, and I think we can at least say that the number is increasing. And I think part of that reason is also because there's some clear goals and targets now. Maybe a few years ago, it really was kind of like the Wild West. If you're going to become a blockchain developer, like, what really are you doing? Yeah. But nowadays, we've seen the proliferation of Solidity and EVMs and things like that. So, you're now able to, or young developers are able to develop a skill set, that's applicable to multiple different venues. You're not kind of pigeonholing yourself into like, one of 6,000 jobs worldwide or anything like that. So even though they're very lucrative, there's more and more opportunities. And like we already said at the start of the call, there's more and more blockchains, but a lot of these are very similar to Ethereum, or at least using EVMs and the same programming languages. But it's going to be a process, certainly. I mean, at OneChain ourselves, we have a pretty stable team at this point in terms of on the development side. So we don't have like very aggressive programs in place to train new devs or anything like that. Although our VP of engineering, who's kind of the main designer of all of our interoperability solutions, he is also a professor at the University of Texas, and so he actually teaches a smart contract course there. Focused on Solidity smart contracts, but so we're kind of very involved on the academia side in terms of the research with the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and things like that. But I can say probably have a foot in the water in terms of education as well, at least a little bit.
I think before I hand back to Ronit, I think we've clearly run over time, so I'm going to drop one last question in front of both of you as a mic drop and run away, and Ronit can take things over and close up. But the other part of looking at this is, okay, so we've talked about use cases, we've talked about adoption, we've talked about supporting the ecosystem, we've talked about all benefits, where we're going through it to a certain degree. The last thing I want to talk about is cost, right? There's always a cost to build this infrastructure, to maintain this infrastructure, to keep developing this infrastructure and make it secure, more efficient, faster, because that's the roadmap everyone wants to go on, right? And that's the other piece, right? I mean, what is the cost going to be like for this ecosystem and this people to use this ecosystem? Is it going to still be very expensive as it tends to be in a lot of places today? Is there going to be some sort of consensus like you see in Europe, or standardization that you see in other spaces, which is controlled by regulators to protect consumers? Where do you guys see cost of the utility in this ecosystem being measured or controlled or driven down to a point where those providing the infrastructure can actually sustain it by putting money back into R&D and growing it, and also the users who are using it actually not incurring such high fees to actually engage with it? What do you guys think on that? And Temujin, I'll chuck that one at you first, because Sarthak, I went to you first.
No, go for it then.
I'm very optimistic on this particular issue. I think the costs are going to come down. We see them come down in bear markets already, but that's not a long-term solution. That's just market forces. But I still personally believe that a chain like Ethereum is still such like a big part of the industry right now, and they have very, very clear a very, very clear roadmap on how they, are going to address these issues. Of course, they just had the merge. That wasn't really kind of about, the cost of fees or processing speed directly. But the kind of next major milestone is the sharding. So that itself is going to help the scalability, and with increased scalability comes more reasonable costs. So I think on the one hand, the developers themselves, those who are running, let's say, newer blockchains that have different types of trade-offs, they themselves are not particularly expensive right now. But the kind of more popular ones like Ethereum, I think in the long term, from an engineering perspective, changes will be made to bring those costs down. And then from the other side, I do think regulators are coming. I think that's ultimately a good thing. I don't know if they're necessarily going to say, it has to be below this cost per transaction. That might be a little beyond the scope, but I think they will be able to exert their influence. Once they'll have some sort of role, I'm sure, in playing in terms of establishing, cross-chain kind of messaging standards. I briefly alluded to like a TCP IP for the blockchain world but the TCP IP was for the internet world was made by DARPA. It's not something that, that just emerged on its own. So whilst it's good to do that work now, at some point, this is kind of where governments and regulators are going to influence things, I'm sure. As well as probably some guidelines in terms of, how decentralized does something have to be considered decentralized, let's say it that way, and kind of provide, actual definitions, along that spectrum until when is something sufficiently decentralized, and all these type of these influences that they can exert on the system. I think these will ultimately, bring into a more sustainable model.
Yep, I guess it's time for a blockchain alliance, Ronit. I think you should switch that together. But Sarthak, same question to you, and then I'll hand back.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with Temujin here. I personally still think like a $7 gas fee is going to be a thing of the past. People aren't going to be paying more than, I would say, like $0.25 as gas fees, even lesser. So I mean, it's definitely going to be much more affordable for a user perspective as well, and also for an enterprise to tie up with the blockchain. Right now, I mean, the cost they're bearing is super duper high. So that also would keep sort of going down and down and down.
All right, guys. Well, thank you both so much for that. That was super insightful. I hope that gives our viewers and listeners some other alternative perspectives as well on the scope there. So Ronit, back to you, sir.
Just as a wrap up to bring this all home, Maybe a 1 minute answer from each.
Uh-oh.
Mm-hmm.
What have you got up your sleeve, Ronit? What have you done?
Sarthak, you can go first on this one.
And this is where I go on mute.
It's basically everything we just talked about for the last 40 minutes. So 2030, are we still talking about Web3 and blockchain? And if so, why? Like, what are the big day-to-day use cases? Or are we looking back and going, nice stepping stone, we're now in Web 5 or Web 6 or whatever it is Jack Dorsey and others are pushing now, I'm losing track. Level 3, Web 7, I don't know. So 60 seconds each. What does it look like? What does the blockchain Web3 world look like in 2030?
2030, all right. So I think from a blockchain point of view, it's here to stay. It's the underlying technology. I mean, yes, of course, we would build more things on top of it. I think a lot of this changes would start coming from the sort of gaming point of view, from financial point of view. Just a quick example, like how we have double entry accounting in today's world. With blockchain, we get triple entry accounting. So we basically don't need audits anymore. So things like these are definitely going to take over the big fours like, Deloitte, KPMG and whatnot. They are definitely going to be incorporating these. And now with commercial enterprises like Gucci, LVMH also dwelling into the world of Web3, it's definitely here to stay, I would say. I'm not a big vision of, I don't have a big vision of like the Web 5, Web 7 for now. I think 2030 would be when we, get sort of on the peak of Web 3 side of things. And maybe some other technology comes then we maybe do welcome it with open hands. But yeah, for now, I just think blockchain, Web 3, it's definitely here to stay. And 2030, we'll see a lot of mass adoption and things moving forward. And also not to forget, the 11,000 cryptos we have are definitely going to fall down to, let's say, 1,000 or even 500 for that matter. A lot of them are going to sort of fade away.
All I heard, Ronit, was party on these guys. So let us know when to show up and we'll be there to celebrate all your success. So wishing you guys the best on that front.
Temujin, 60 seconds. I think Sarthak took that maybe 6 minutes, but 60 seconds.
Yes, 2030, I think a lot of things are running on blockchain. I hope we don't have to talk about it as much, trying to convince people. I hope it's just happening in the background. We don't want necessarily the end users to have to know what they're interacting with. 2030, frankly, is probably a little soon to have that true seamless experience, but I'm optimistic. Let's just say 2030, fine, let's do it. And I also think, a lot more assets are going to be tokenized. But again, we don't want that to surface to the end user. So I think, blockchain is going to continue its steady march forward. More and more enterprises are going to start adopting it in different parts of their tech stack. But the big improvement is going to be at the user experience level. It's going to be way more seamless. It's not going to feel dangerous, every time you want to send a token. If you send Bitcoin, you're not going to sit there sweating for an hour, wondering if you made a mistake. It'll just be a nicer experience.
Yeah.
With that, blockchain in 2030 is going to be like a walk at midnight in Dubai, not San Francisco. We're going to end here. Thank you, everybody, for joining. That's been an awesome session.